Chapter 8. The impudent Brat, HASSEIN, Beelzebub's grandson, dares to call men slugs. HASSEIN immediately sat down at Beelzebub's feet and coaxingly said, "Tell me anything you wish, my dear grandfather. Anything you tell me will be the greatest joy for me, if only because it is you who relate it." "No," objected Beelzebub, "you yourself ask what interests you most of all. It will give me at the present moment much pleasure to tell you about just whatever you particularly wish to know." "Dear and kind grandfather, tell me then something about about those slugs." "What? About what slugs?" asked Beelzebub, not understanding the boy's question. "Don't you remember, grandfather, that a little while ago, when you spoke about the free-centred beings breeding on the various planets of that solar system where you existed for such a long time, you happened to say that on one planet, I forget how you called it, that on that planet exist free-centred beings who, on the whole, are like us, but whose skin is a little slimier than ours?" "Ah," laughed Beelzebub, "you are surely asking about those beings who breed on the planet Earth and who call themselves men." "Yes, grandfather, yes, just that. Tell me about those men beings a little more in detail. I should like to know more about them," concluded HASSEIN. Then Beelzebub said, "About them I could tell you a great deal, for I often visited that planet and existed among them for a long time, and even made friends with many of those terrestrial free-brained beings. Indeed, you will find it very interesting to know more about these beings, for they are very peculiar. There are many things among them which you would not see among any other beings of any other planet of our universe. I know them very well, because their arising, their further development, and their existence during many, many centuries, by their time calculation, have occurred before my eyes. And not only their own arising occurred before my eyes, but even the accomplished formation of the planet itself on which they arise and exist. When we first arrived at that solar system and settled on the planet Mars, nothing yet existed on that planet Earth, which had not yet even had time to cool off completely after its concentration. From the very beginning, this same planet has been the cause of many serious troubles to our endlessness. If you wish, I will tell you first of all about the events of general cosmic character connected with this planet, which were the cause of the said troubles of your endlessness." "Yes, my dear grandfather," said HASSEIN, "tell me first about this. It will surely be quite as interesting as everything you relate." Chapter 9. The Cause of the Genesis of the Moon. Beelzebub began his tale as follows. After we arrived on the planet Mars, where we were directed to exist, we began slowly to settle down there. We were still fully absorbed in the bustle of organising everything externally necessary for a more or less tolerable existence in the midst of that nature absolutely foreign to us, when suddenly, on one of the very busiest days, the whole planet Mars was shaken, and a little later such an asphyxiating stink arose that at first it seemed that everything in the universe had been mixed up with something, one might say, indescribable. Only after a considerable time had passed, and when the said stink had gone, did we recover and gradually make out what had happened. We understood that the cause of this terrible phenomenon was just that same planet Earth, which from time to time approached very near to our planet Mars, and which therefore we had possibilities of observing clearly, sometimes even without a tescuanu. For reasons we could not yet comprehend, this planet, it transpired, had burst, and 2 fragments detached from it had flown off into space. I have already told you that this solar system was then still being formed, and was not yet blended completely with what is called the harmony of reciprocal maintenance of all cosmic concentrations. It was subsequently learned that in accordance with this said general cosmic harmony of reciprocal maintenance of all cosmic concentrations, there had also to function in this system a comet of what is called vast orbit still existing, and named the comet Condor. And just this very comet, although it was then already concentrated, was actualised in its full path for only the first time. As certain competent sacred individuals also later confidently explained to us, the line of the path of the said comet had to cross the line on which the path of that planet Earth also lay, but as a result of the erroneous calculations of a certain sacred individual concerned with the matters of world creation and world maintenance, the time of the passing of each of these concentrations through the point of intersection of the lines of their paths coincided, and owing to this error, the planet Earth and the comet Condor collided, and collided so violently that from this shock, as I have already told you, 2 large fragments were broken off from the planet Earth and flew into space. This shock entailed those serious consequences because, on account of the recent arising of this planet, the atmosphere which might have served as a buffer in such a case had not yet had time to be completely formed upon it. And, my boy, our endlessness was also immediately informed of this general cosmic misfortune. In consequence of this report, a whole commission consisting of angels and archangels, specialists in the work of world creation and world maintenance, under the direction of the most great Archangel Psyche, was immediately sent from the most holy Sun Absolute to that solar system Ours. The Most High Commission came to our planet Mars, since it was the nearest to the planet Earth, and from this planet of ours began its investigations. The sacred members of this Most High Commission at once quieted us by saying that the apprehended danger of a catastrophe on a great cosmic scale had already passed. And the arch-engineer, Archangel Algamatant, was good enough to explain to us personally that in all probability what had happened was as follows. The broken-off fragments of the planet Earth had lost the momentum they received from the shock before they had reached the limit of that part of space which is the sphere of this planet, and hence, according to the law of falling, these fragments had begun to fall backwards towards their fundamental piece. But they could no longer fall upon their fundamental piece, because in the meantime they had come under the cosmic law called law of catching up, and were entirely subject to its influence. And they would therefore now make regular elliptic orbits around their fundamental piece, just as the fundamental piece, namely the planet Earth, made and makes its orbit around its sun Ours. And so it will always continue, unless some new unforeseen catastrophe on a large scale changes it in one way or another. Glory to chance, concluded his pan to measurability. The harmonious general system movement was not destroyed by all this, and the peaceful existence of that system Ours was soon re-established. But nevertheless, my boy, this Most High Commission, having then calculated all the facts at hand, and also all that might happen in the future, came to the conclusion that although the fragments of the planet Earth might maintain themselves for the time being in their existing positions, yet in view of certain so-called Taz-Tartunarian displacements conjectured by the Commission, they might in the future leave their position and bring about a large number of irreparable calamities both for this system Ours and for other neighbouring solar systems. Therefore, the Most High Commission decided to take certain measures to avoid this eventuality, and they resolved that the best measure in the given case would be that the fundamental piece, namely the planet Earth, should constantly send to its detached fragments for their maintenance the sacred vibrations Ashgaokin. This sacred substance can be formed on planets only when both fundamental cosmic laws operating in them, the sacred Heptaparapashinok and the sacred Triamazikamno, function as is called Ilnosopano, that is to say, when the said sacred cosmic laws in the given cosmic concentration are deflected independently and also manifest on its surface independently. Of course, independently only within certain limits. And so, my boy, inasmuch as such a cosmic actualization was possible only with the sanction of his endlessness, the great Archangel Psyche, accompanied by several other sacred members of that most high commission, set off immediately to his endlessness to beseech him to give the said sanction. And afterwards, when the said sacred individuals had obtained the sanction of his endlessness for the actualization of the Ilnosopanian process on that planet also, and when this process had been actualized under the direction of the same great Archangel Psyche, then from that time on that planet also, just as on many others, there began to arise the corresponding, owing to which the said detached fragments exist until now, without constituting a menace for a catastrophe on a great scale. Of these two fragments, the larger was named Lunda Perso, and the smaller Annulus, and the ordinary free-brain beings who afterwards arose and were formed on this planet also at first called them by these names, but the beings of later times called them differently at different periods, and in most recent times the larger fragment has come to be called Moon, but the name of the smaller has been gradually forgotten. As for the beings there now, not only have they no name at all for this smaller fragment, but they do not even suspect its existence. It is interesting to notice here that the beings of a continent on that planet called Atlantis, which afterwards perished, still knew of this second fragment of their planet, and also called it Annulus. But the beings of the last period of the same continent, in whom the results of the consequences of the properties of that organ called Nabuffer, about which, it now seems, I shall have to explain to you even in great detail, had begun to be crystallized and to become part of their common presences, called it also Kimi Spy, the meaning of which for them was never allowing one to sleep in peace. Contemporary free-brain beings of this peculiar planet do not know of this former fragment of their planet, chiefly because its comparatively small size and the remoteness of the place of its movement make it quite invisible to their sight, and also because no grandmother ever told them that once upon a time any such little satellite of their planet was known. And if any of them should by chance see it through their good, but nevertheless child's toy of theirs called a telescope, he would pay no attention to it, mistaking it simply for a big area light. The contemporary beings will probably never see it again, since it has become quite proper to their nature to see only unreality. Let us give them their due. During recent centuries, they have really most artistically mechanized themselves to see nothing real. So, my boy, owing to all the aforesaid, there first arose on this planet also, as there should what are called similitudes of the whole, or as they are also called microcosmoses, and further, there were formed from these microcosmoses what are called odiastonian and polar medectic vegetations. Still further, as also usually occurs, from the same microcosmoses, there also began to be grouped various forms of what are called tetrarcosmoses of all three brain systems. And among these latter, there then first arose just those biped tetrarcosmoses, whom you a while ago called SLUGS. About how and why upon planets, during the transition of the fundamental sacred laws into Ilnosopanian, there arise similitudes of the whole, and about what factors contribute to the formation of one or another of these, as they are called systems of being brains, and also about all the laws of world creation and world maintenance in general. I will explain to you especially some other time. But meanwhile, know that these free-brained beings arising on the planet Earth, who interest you, had in them in the beginning the same possibilities for perfecting the functions for the acquisition of being reason as have all other forms of tetocosmoses arising throughout the whole universe. But afterwards, just in the period when they also, as it proceeds on other similar planets of our great universe, were beginning gradually to be spiritualized by what is called being instinct, just then, unfortunately for them, there befell a misfortune which was unforeseen from above, and most grievous for them. Chapter 10. Why Men Are Not Men. Beelzebub sighed deeply, and continued to speak as follows. After the actualizing on this planet of the El-Nu-Zupanian process, 1 year by objective time calculation passed. During this period, there had gradually been coordinated on this planet also the corresponding processes for the involution and evolution of everything arising there. And of course, there began gradually to be crystallized in the free-brained beings there the corresponding data for the acquisition of objective reason. In short, on this planet also everything had then already began to proceed in the usual normal order. And therefore, my boy, if the Most High Commission, under the supreme direction of the same Archangel Psyche, had not, at the end of a year, gone there again, perhaps all the subsequent misunderstandings connected with the free-brained beings arising on that ill-fated planet might not have occurred. This second descent of the Most High Commission to that planet was due to the fact that in spite of the measures they had taken, of which I have told you, there had not yet crystallized in the reasons of the majority of its sacred members a complete assurance of the impossibility of any undesirable surprise in the future, and they now wished to verify on the spot the results of those measures. It was just during this second descent that the Most High Commission decided in any event, if only for the sake of their own reassurance, to actualize certain further special measures, among which was also that measure, the consequences of which have not only gradually turned into a stupendous terror for the free-brained beings themselves who arise on this ill-fated planet, but have even become, so to say, a malignant sore for the whole of the great universe. You must know that by the time of this second descent of the Most High Commission, there had already gradually been engendered in them, as is proper to free-brained beings, what is called mechanical instinct. The sacred members of this Most High Commission then reasoned that if the said mechanical instinct in these biped free-brained beings of that planet should develop towards the attainment of objective reason, as usually occurs everywhere among free-brained beings, then it might quite possibly happen that they would prematurely comprehend the real cause of their arising and existence, and make a great deal of trouble. It might happen that, having understood the reason for their arising, namely, that by their existence they should maintain the detached fragments of their planet, and being convinced of this, their slavery to circumstances utterly foreign to them, they would be unwilling to continue their existence, and would on principle destroy themselves. So, my boy, in view of this, the Most High Commission then decided, among other things provisionally to implant into the common presences of the free-brained beings there, a special organ with a property such that, first, they should perceive reality topsy-turvy, and, secondly, that every repeated impression from outside should crystallize in them data which would engender factors for evoking in them sensations of pleasure and enjoyment. And then, in fact, with the help of the chief common universal arc chemist physicist Angel Lewis, who was also among the members of this Most High Commission. They caused to grow in the free-brain beings there in a special way at the base of their spinal column, at the root of their tau, which they also at that time still had, and which part of their common presences furthermore still had its normal exterior expressing the, so to say, fullness of its interior significance, a something which assisted the arising of the said properties in them. And this something they then first called the organ Kundabuffer. Having made this organ grow in the presences of the free brain beings, and having seen that it would work, the Most High Commission, consisting of sacred individuals, headed by the Archangel Psyche, reassured and with good consciences, returned to the centre, while there, on the planet Earth, which has taken your fancy, the action of this astonishing and exceedingly ingenious invention began from the first day to develop, and developed, as the wise Mullah Nasir Eddin would say, like a Jericho trumpet in crescendo. Now, in order that you may have at least an approximate understanding of the results of the properties of the organ devised and actualized by the incomparable Angel Leusus, blessed be his name to all eternity, it is indispensable that you should know about the various manifestations of the free brain beings of that planet, not only during the period when this organ Kundabuffer existed in their presences, but also during the later periods when, although this astonishing organ and its properties have been destroyed in them, nevertheless, owing to many causes, the consequences of its properties have begun to be crystallized in their presences. But this I will explain to you later. Meanwhile, you must note that there was still a third descent of that Most High Commission to that planet, 3 years later, according to objective time calculations. But this time it was under the direction of the most great Arch-Seraph Sebotata, the most great Archangel Psyche, having, in the meantime, become worthy to become the divine individual he now is, namely, one of the 4 quarter maintainers of the whole universe. And during just this third descent there, when it was made clear by the thorough investigations of the sacred members of this third Most High Commission that for the maintenance of the existence of those said detached fragments there was no longer any need to continue to actualize the deliberately taken anticipatory measures, then among the other measures there was also destroyed, with the help of the same arch-chemist physicist Angel Leusis, in the presences of the free brain beings there, the said organ Kundabuffer, with all its astonishing properties. But let us return to the tale I began. Now listen. When our confusion, caused by the recent catastrophe that had menaced that whole solar system, had passed off, we slowly, after this unexpected interruption, resumed the settlement of our new place on the planet Mars. Little by little, we all of us made ourselves familiar with the local nature and adapted ourselves to the existing conditions. As I have already said, many of us definitely settled down on the planet Mars, and others, by the ship Occasion, which had been put at the disposal of the beings of our tribe for interplanetary communication, either went or prepared to go to exist on other planets of the same solar system. But I, with my kinsman, and some of my near attendants, remained to exist on that planet Mars. Yes, I must note that by the time to which my tale refers, my first Tescuano had already been set up in the observatory which I had constructed on the planet Mars, and I was just then devoting myself entirely to the further organisation and development of this observatory of mine, for the more detailed observation of the remote concentrations of our great universe and of the planets of this solar system. Among the objects of my observations, then, was also this planet Earth. Time passed. The process of existence on this planet also began gradually to be established, and it seemed, from all appearances, that the process of existence was proceeding there just as on all other planets. But by close observation, first, it could be clearly seen that the numbers of these free-brain beings were gradually increasing, and, secondly, it was possible sometimes to observe very strange manifestations of theirs. That is, from time to time they did something which was never done by free-brain beings on other planets. Namely, they would suddenly, without rhyme or reason, begin destroying one another's existence. Sometimes this destruction of one another's existence proceeded there not in one region alone, but in several, and would last not just one Diagnostic, but many Diagnostics, and sometimes even for whole Ornakras. Diagnos signifies day, Ornakra signifies month. It was sometimes very noticeable also that from this horrible process of theirs, their numbers rapidly diminished. But on the other hand, during other periods, when there was a lull in these processes, their numbers also very noticeably increased. To this peculiarity of theirs, we gradually got used, having explained it to ourselves that obviously, for certain higher considerations, these properties also must deliberately have been given to the organ Kundabuffer by the Most High Commission. In other words, seeing the fecundity of these biped beings, we assumed that this had been done with a forethought, in view of the necessity that they should exist in such large numbers for the needs of the maintenance of the common cosmic harmonious movement. Had it not been for this strange peculiarity of theirs, it would never have entered anybody's head that there was anything queer on that planet. During the period to which the aforesaid refers, I visited most of the planets of that solar system, the populated and the as yet unpopulated. Personally, I liked best of all the free-centred beings breeding on the planet bearing the name Saturn, whose exterior is quite unlike ours, but resembles that of the being bird raven. It is interesting, by the way, to remark that for some reason or other, the form of being bird raven breeds not only on almost all the planets of this solar system, but also on most of those other planets of the whole of our great universe, upon which beings of various brain systems arise and are coated with planetary bodies of different forms. The verbal intercourse of these beings, ravens, of that planet Saturn, is something like ours. But in regard to their utterance, it is, in my opinion, the most beautiful of any I have ever heard. It can be compared to the singing of our best singers, when, with all their being, they sing in a minor key. And as for their relations with others, I don't even know how to describe them, can be known only by existing among them and by experiencing them oneself. All that can be said is that these bird beings have hearts exactly like those of the angels nearest our endless Maker and Creator. They exist strictly according to the 9th commandment of our Creator, namely, do unto another's as you would do unto your own. Later, I must certainly tell you much more in detail about those free-brain beings also who arise and exist on the planet Saturn, since one of my real friends during the whole period of my exile in that solar system was a being of just that planet, who had the exterior coating of a raven, and whose name was Hahak. Chapter 11. A Piquant Trait of the Peculiar Psyche of Contemporary Man. Now let us return to those free-brain beings arising on the planet Earth, who have interested you most of all, and whom you have called slugs. I shall begin by saying how glad I am that you happen to be a long way from those free-centred beings whom you called by a word so insulting to their dignity, and that they are not likely ever to hear of it. Do you know, you poor thing, you small boy, not yet aware of himself, what they would do to you, particularly the contemporary beings there, if they should hear what you call them? What they would have done to you if you had been there, and if they had got hold of you, I am seized with horror at the very mention of it. At best, they would have thrashed you so, that, as our Mullah Nasir Eddin there says, you wouldn't have recovered your senses before the next crop of birches. In any case, I advise you that, whenever you start anything new, you should always bless fate and beseech her mercy that she should always be on guard and prevent the beings of the planet Earth from ever suspecting that you, my beloved and only grandson, dared to call them slugs. You must know that during the time of my observations of them from the planet Mars, and during the periods of my existence among them, I studied the psyche of those strange free-brain beings very thoroughly, and so I already know very well what they would do to anybody who dared to give them such a nickname. To be sure, it was only in childish naivety that you called them so, but the free-brain beings of that peculiar planet, especially the contemporary ones, do not discriminate such fine points. Who called them, why, and in what circumstances? It's all one. They have been called by a name they consider insulting, and that's quite enough. Discrimination in such matters is, according to the understanding of most of them, simply, as they express it, pouring from the empty into the void. Be that as it may, you were in any case extremely rash to call the free-brained beings breeding on the planet Earth by such an offensive name. First, because you have made me anxious for you, and secondly, because you have laid up for yourself a menace for the future. The position is this. Though, as I have already said, you are a long way off, and they will be unable to get at you to punish you personally, yet, nevertheless, if they should somehow unexpectedly chance to learn, even at 20th hand, how you insulted them, then you could at once be sure of their real anathema, and the dimensions of this anathema would depend upon the interest with which they happened to be occupied at the given moment. Perhaps it is worthwhile describing to you how the beings of the earth would behave if they should happen to learn that you had so insulted them. This description may serve as a very good example for the elucidation of the strangeness of the psyche of these free-brained beings who interest you. Provoked by such an incident as your thus insulting them, if everything was rather dull with them at the given moment, owing to the absence of any other similar absurd interest, they would arrange somewhere in a previously chosen place, with previously invited people, all of course dressed in costumes specially designed for such occasions, what is called a solemn council. First of all, for this solemn council of theirs, they would select from among themselves what is called a president, and only then would they proceed with their trial. To begin with, they would, as they say there, pick you to pieces, and not only you, but your father, your grandfather, and perhaps even all the way back to Adam. If they should then decide, of course as always by a majority of votes, that you are guilty, they would sentence you according to the indications of a code of laws collated on the basis of former similar puppet plays by beings called old fossils. But if this should happen, by a majority of votes, to find nothing criminal in your action at all, though this very seldom occurs among them, then this whole trial of theirs, set out on a paper in detail and signed by the whole lot of them, would be dispatched, you would think, into the waste paper basket. Oh no, to appropriate specialists, in the given instances, to what is called the hierarchy or holy synod, where the same procedure would be repeated, only in this case you would be tried by important beings there. Only at the very end of this true pouring from the empty into the void would they come to the main point, namely, that the accused is out of reach. But it is just here that arises the principal danger to your person, namely, that when they are quite certain beyond all doubt that they cannot get hold of you, they will then unanimously decide nothing more nor less than, as I have already said, to anathematize you. And do you know what that is and how it is done? No. Then listen and shudder. The most important beings will decree to all the other beings that all their appointed establishments, such as what are called churches, chapels, synagogues, town halls, and so on, special officials shall, on special occasions, with appointed ceremonies, wish for you in thought something like the following: that you should lose your horns, or that your hair should turn prematurely grey, or that the food in your stomach would be turned into coffin nails, or that your future wife's tongue should be 3 times its size, or that whenever you take a bite of your pet pie it should be turned into soap, and so on and so forth in the same strain. Do you now understand to what dangers you exposed yourself when you called those remote free-brained freaks slugs? Having finished thus, Beelzebub looked with a smile on his favourite. Chapter 12. The First Growl. A little later, Beelzebub began to speak as follows. A story I've just recalled, connected with these anathemas I have mentioned, may provide very useful material for beginning to comprehend the strangeness of the psyche of the free-brained beings of that planet which has taken your fancy. And furthermore, this story may reassure you a little and give you some hope that if these peculiar terrestrial beings should chance to learn how you had insulted them and should anathematize you, then perhaps after all something not so very bad might come of it for you. The story I'm going to tell you occurred quite recently among the contemporary free-brained beings there, and it arose from the following events. In one of these large communities there peaceably existed an ordinary being who was by profession what is there called a writer. You must here know that in long past ages one might still occasionally run across beings of that profession who still invented and wrote something really by themselves. But in these later epochs, the writers among the beings there, particularly among contemporary beings, have been of those that only copy from many already existing books all kinds of ideas, and by fitting them together make a new book. And they prefer books which have reached them from their very remote ancestors. It is necessary to remark that the books written by contemporary writers there are, all taken together, the principal cause that the reason of all the other free-brained beings is becoming more and more what the venerable Mullah Nasir ad-Din calls stuff and nonsense. And so, my boy, the contemporary writer of whom I began to speak was just a writer like all the rest there, and nothing particular in himself. Once, when he had finished some book or other, he began to think what he should write about next, and with this in view, he decided to look for some new idea in the books contained in his what is called library, such as every writer there is bound to have. As he was looking, a book called the Gospels happened to fall into his hands. The Gospels is the name given there to a book once written by certain persons called Matthew, Mark, Luke and John about Jesus Christ, a messenger from our endlessness to that planet. This book is widely circulated among those free-centred beings there who nominally exist according to the indications of this messenger. This book, having chanced to fall into this writer's hands, the thought suddenly entered his head, why should not I also make a gospel? From investigations I had to make for quite different needs of mine, it turned out that he then further deliberated as follows. Am I any worse than those ancient barbarians, Matthew, Mark, Luke and Johnny? At least I am more cultured than they ever were, and I can write a much better gospel for my contemporaries. And very decidedly it is necessary to write just a gospel because the contemporary people called English and American have a great weakness for this book, and the rate of exchange of their pounds and dollars is not half bad just now. No sooner said than done, and from that very day he wiseacred away at his new gospel. But it was only when he had finished it, however, and had given it to the printers, that all the further events connected with this new gospel of his began. At any other time, nothing perhaps would have happened, and this new gospel of his would simply have slipped into its niche in the libraries of the bibliomaniacs there, among the multitudes of other books expounding similar truths. But fortunately or unfortunately for this writer, it happened that certain power-possessing beings of that great community in which he existed had just been having rotten luck at what is called roulette and baccarat, and they therefore kept on demanding what they called money from the ordinary beings of their community, whereupon, thanks to those inordinate demands for money, the ordinary beings of that community at length awoke from their usual what is called torpor and began to sit up. Seeing this, the power-possessing beings who remained at home became alarmed and took corresponding measures, and among the measures they took was also the immediate destruction from off the face of their planet of everything newly arising in their native land, such as could possibly keep the ordinary beings of their community from resuming their hibernation. And it was just at this time that the aforementioned gospel of this writer appeared. In the contents of this new gospel also, the power-possessing beings found something which also to their understanding might keep the ordinary beings of their community from hibernating again, and they therefore decided almost immediately to get rid of both the writer himself and his gospel, because they had now become quite expert in getting rid of these native upstarts who did not mind their own business. But for certain reasons they could not treat this writer in this way, and so they got excited and hemmed and hawed about what they should do. Some proposed that they should simply shut him up where many rats and lice breed. Others proposed to send him to Timbuktu, and so on and so forth. But in the end, they decided to anathematize this writer together with his gospel, publicly and punctiliously, according to all the rules, and moreover, with the very same anathema with which no doubt they would have anathematized you also, if they had learned how you had insulted them. And so, my boy, the strangeness of the psyche of the contemporary free-brain beings of this peculiar planet was revealed in the given instance in this, that when this writer and his gospel had been publicly anathematized with this anathema, the result for him was, as the highly esteemed Mullah Nasir-ed-Din once again says, just roses, roses. What occurred was as follows. The ordinary beings of the said community, seeing the fuss made about this writer by the power-possessing beings, became very greatly interested in him, and avidly bought and read not only this new gospel of his, but also all the books he had written before. Whereupon, as usually happens with the free-centred beings breeding on this peculiar planet, all the other interests of the beings of the said community gradually died down, and they talked and thought only of this writer. And as it also happens, whereas some praised him to the skies, others condemned him, and the result of these discussions and conversations was that the numbers interested in him grew not only among the beings of his own community, but among the beings of other communities also. And this occurred because some of the power-possessing beings of this community, usually with pockets full of money, still continued in their turn to go to other communities where roulette and baccarat proceeded, and carrying on their discussion there concerning this writer, they gradually infected the beings of other communities also with this affair. In short, owing to the strangeness of their psyche, it has gradually come about there that even at the present time, when this writer's gospel has long been forgotten, his name is known almost everywhere as that of an excellent writer. Anything he writes now, they all seize upon and regard as full of indisputable truth. Everybody today looks upon his writings with the same veneration with which the ancient Chalcanians there listened to the predictions of their sacred Pythoness. It is interesting to notice here that if at the present time you ask any being there about this writer, he would know him, and of course speak of him as an extraordinary being. But if you were then to ask what he wrote, it would turn out that most of them, if of course they confessed the truth, had never read a single one of his books. All the same, they would talk about him, discuss him, and of course splatteringly insist that he was a being with an extraordinary mind and phenomenally well acquainted with the psyche of the beings dwelling on the planet Earth. Chapter 13. Why in man's reason fantasy may be perceived as reality. My dear and kind grandfather, be so kind as to explain to me, if only in a general way, why these beings there are such that they take the ephemeral for the real. To this question of his grandson, Beelzebub replied thus. It was only during later periods that the free-brain beings of the planet Earth began to have this particularity in their psyche, and just this particularity arose in them only because their predominant part, which was formed in them as in all free-brain beings, gradually allowed other parts of their total presences to perceive every new impression without what is called being part dog duty, but just merely as, in general, such impressions are perceived by the separate independent localizations existing under the name of being centres present in the free-brain beings, or, as I should say in their language, they believe everything anybody says, and not solely that which they themselves have been able to recognise by their own sane deliberation. In general, any new understanding is crystallised in the presence of these strange beings only if Smith speaks of somebody or something in a certain way, and then if Brown says the same, the hearer is quite convinced it is just so and couldn't possibly be otherwise. Thanks merely to this particularity of their psyche, and to the fact that the said writer was much spoken about in the said manner, most of the beings there at the present time are quite convinced that he is indeed a very great psychologist and has an incomparable knowledge of the psyche of the beings of this planet. But, as a matter of fact, when I was on that planet for the last time, and, having heard of the said writer, once went myself especially to see him on quite another matter, he was, according to my understanding, not only like all the other contemporary writers there, that is to say, extremely limited, and as our dear Mullah Nasir-ed-Din would say, able to see no further than his nose, but as regards any knowledge of the real psyche of the beings of his planet in real conditions, he might safely even be called totally illiterate. I repeat that the story of this writer is a very characteristic example, showing the extent to which, in the free-brained beings who have taken your fancy, particularly in the contemporary ones, the realisation of being part dog duty is absent, and how their own subjective being convictions formed by their own logical deliberations are never, as is general it is proper to free-brained beings, crystallised in them, but only those are crystallised which depend exclusively upon what others say about the given question. It was only because they failed to realise being part dog duty, which realisation alone enables a being to become aware of genuine reality, that they saw in the said writer some perfection or other which was not there at all. This strange trait of their general psyche, namely of being satisfied with just what Smith or Brown says, without trying to know more, became rooted in them already long ago, and now they no longer strive at all to know anything cognisable by their own active deliberations alone. Concerning all this, it must be said that neither the organ-kunde-buffer which their ancestors had is to blame, nor its consequences which, owing to a mistake on the part of certain sacred individuals, were crystallised in their ancestors, and later began to pass by heredity from generation to generation. But they themselves were personally to blame for it, and just on account of the abnormal conditions of external ordinary being existence, which they themselves have gradually established, and which have gradually formed in their common presence just what has now become their inner evil god called self-calming. But all this you yourself, later on, will well understand when I shall have given you, as I have already promised, more information about that planet which has taken your fancy. In any case, I strongly advise you to be very careful in the future in your references to the three-brain beings of that planet, not to offend them in any way, otherwise, as they also say there, with what may the devil not joke? They might find out about your insulting them, and, to use another of their expressions, lay you by the heels. And in the present case there is no harm in recalling again one of the wise sentences of our dear Mullah Nasir ad-Din, who says, "Struth, what might not happen in this world? A flea might swallow an elephant." Beelzebub intended to say something more, but at that moment a ship's servant entered, and approaching, handed him an ephraogram in his name. When Beelzebub had finished listening to the contents of the said ephraogram, and the ship's servant had gone, HASSEIN turned to Beelzebub again with the following words: "Dear grandfather, please go on talking about the three-centred beings arising and existing on that interesting planet called Earth." Beelzebub, having looked at his grandson again with a special smile, and having made a very strange gesture with his head, continued to speak as follows. Chapter 14. The beginnings of perspectives promising nothing very cheerful. I must tell you first that the three-brain beings on that planet also had, in the beginning, presences similar to those possessed in general by all what are called Martinian, three-centred beings arising on all the corresponding planets of the whole of our great universe, and they also had the same, as it is called, duration of existence as all the other three-brain beings. All the various changes in their presences began for the most part after the second misfortune occurred to this planet, during which misfortune the chief continent of that ill-fated planet, then existing under the name Atlantis, entered within the planet. And from that time on, as little by little they created for themselves all sorts of conditions of external being existence, thanks to which the quality of their radiations went steadily from bad to worse. Great nature was compelled gradually to transform their common presences by means of various compromises and changes, in order to regulate the quality of the vibrations which they radiated, and which were required chiefly for the preservation of the well-being of the former parts of that planet. For the same reason, great nature gradually so increased the numbers of the beings there, that at the present time they are now breeding on all the lands formed on that planet. The exterior forms of their planetary bodies are all made alike, and of course in respect of size, and in their other subjective particularities, they are each coated, just as we are, in accordance with the reflection of heredity, with the conditions at the moment of conception, and with the other factors that serve in general as the causes for the arising and formation of every being. They also differ among themselves in the colour of their skin, and in the conformation of their hair, and these latter particularities are determined in their presences, just as they are everywhere else, by the effects of that part of the planetary surface where the given beings arise, and where they are formed until they reach the age of responsible beings, or as they say, until they become adult. As regards their general psyche itself and its fundamental traits, no matter upon what part of the surface of their planet they arise, these traits in all of them have precisely the same particularities, among them being also that property of the free-brain beings there, thanks to which on that strange planet alone in the whole of the universe does that horrible process occur among free-brain beings, which is called the process of the destruction of each other's existence, or as it is called on that ill-fated planet, war. Besides this chief particularity of their common psyche, there are completely crystallized in them, and there unfailingly becomes a part of their common presences, regardless of where they may arise and exist, functions which exist under the names egoism, self-love, vanity, pride, self-conceit, credulity, suggestibility, and many other properties quite abnormal and quite unbecoming to the essence of any free-brain beings whatsoever. Of these abnormal being particularities, the particularity of their psyche, the most terrible for them personally, is that which is called suggestibility. About this extremely strange and singular psychic particularity I shall specially explain to you some time. Having said this, Beelzebub was thoughtful, and this time longer than usual, and then, turning again to his grandson, he said, "I see that the free-brained beings arising and existing on the peculiar planet called Earth interest you very much, and as during our voyage on the ship Karnak, we shall have willy-nilly to talk about many things just to pass away the time. I will tell you all I can just about these free-brained beings. I think it will be best for your clear understanding of the strangeness of the psyche of the free-brained beings arising on the planet Earth if I relate to you my personal descents to that planet in their order, and the events which occurred there during these descents of mine, of which I myself was a witness. I personally visited the surface of the planet Earth 6 times in all, and each of these personal visits of mine was brought about by a different set of circumstances. I shall begin with my first descent.